Today we're going to talk about the man who literally filled the empty air around us with information, Guglielmo Marconi. But listen, this isn't just a simple story about some inventor in a lab. No, this is about a pragmatic genius, a totally ruthless monopolist, and yeah, a political figure whose legacy is just as complex and charged as the very waves he first learned to tame. Let's get into it.
To really get what Marconi did, you have to try and imagine a world that feels, well, almost alien to us now. Picture this. A ship leaves port. The second it dips below the horizon, it is utterly, completely alone. It's like a tiny island floating in the void with absolutely no way to call for help, no way to get news, no way to warn anyone about danger. It's just gone.
So, back in the late 19th century, sure, the telegraph had wired up the continents. You could send a message from London to New York. But the oceans and the very air around us, what they called the ether, totally profoundly silent. It was a world connected by these fragile little threads, but it was still fundamentally broken apart.
In this image, it really captures just how vulnerable everyone was. Think about the British Empire. Its naval power was everything, but its ships were basically deaf and dumb once they were at sea. Armies on the march would literally outrun their own telegraph lines. This wasn't just some minor inconvenience. It was a huge strategic weakness just sitting there waiting for someone to solve it.
And into this silent world steps a young Guglielmo Marconi. Now, he wasn't some university physicist with a bunch of degrees. He was actually privately tutored. He was an amateur, really, an obsessive tinkerer who saw the real-world commercial potential in electromagnetic waves when the world's top scientists just saw them as a neat laboratory trick.
You have to understand, the established science of the day was crystal clear on this. Physicists like Heinrich Hertz, the guy who first proved these waves existed, they all believed the waves traveled in straight lines, just like a beam of light. So what does that mean? It means they thought long-distance communication was impossible, because the curve of the Earth would just get in the way. It was a dead end.
But this is where we see Marconi's true genius. He's at his family's estate, the Villa Grafone, and he has this incredible eureka moment. Instead of just a simple antenna, he connects one side of his transmitter to a wire way up in the air and the other side to a metal plate he buried in the ground. That simple act, it turned the planet itself into part of the circuit. It launched what we call a ground wave that literally hugged the terrain, completely defying that line of sight dogma.
This is the moment it all became real. I mean, what a story. He sends his brother and a local farmer out into the fields with the receiver, telling them to go completely over a hill, totally out of sight. The signal, if you hear the message, fire this shotgun. So Marconi taps the key, a few moments of silence, and then, boom, the sound of the shot echoes back. He had just broken the horizon.
Okay, so he's conquered distance. Problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. This created a massive new problem. These early spark gap signals were incredibly messy and noisy. They were like a blast of static across a huge range of frequencies. And fixing that was going to be the key to making wireless a truly usable technology.
Think of it like this. Every single one of those spark gap transmitters was like taking a sledgehammer and whacking a giant bell. It didn't make a clean, pretty note, it made this huge, noisy clang that drowned everything else out. So if two ships tried to transmit anywhere near each other, all you'd get was meaningless noise. The whole system was totally unscalable.
The solution, and you could argue it was his most important technical achievement, brought order to all that chaos. It all came down to one famous British patent, number 7777.
He called it syntony, and with it, Marconi basically invented the concept of a channel. By using tuned circuits, he could make a transmitter speak on one specific frequency and a receiver listen only for that frequency, ignoring all the other noise. Seriously, every time you pick a Wi-Fi channel or tune your car radio, you are using the exact principle he patented back in 1900.
So, with the technology now ready for prime time, Marconi sets his sights on the ultimate prize, conquering the Atlantic Ocean. And this meant he was picking a fight not just with thousands of miles of open water, but with the entire scientific establishment.
I mean, the world's leading physicists were all saying this is impossible, it can't be done. They actually calculated that for the waves to get from Cornwall to Newfoundland, they'd have to clear a wall of water more than 100 miles high because of the Earth's curve. Marconi? He just ignored them and built this massive, ridiculously powerful transmitter in a place called Poldhu in Cornwall.
So it's December 12th, 1901. Marconi is on a stormy hill in Newfoundland, holding a headset to his ear, just listening. The plan was for the station back in England to transmit just one single letter, over and over. And then, through all the static, he heard it. 3 faint, but distinct clicks. Dot, dot, dot. The letter S. A message had just crossed 2,137 miles of ocean. The world, in that instant, got a whole lot smaller.
But here's the thing. Marconi wasn't just an inventor. He was a brilliant and absolutely ruthless businessman. He didn't sell his gear. No, he sold a service. Shipping companies had to lease his equipment and use his specially trained operators, the Marconi men. And here's the killer move. Those operators were strictly forbidden from talking to any ship that was using a competitor system. He created a walled garden that forced everyone onto his network and gave him total, suffocating control.
And that absolute control, it would have fatal consequences. On the night of April 14, 1912, the wireless operator on a ship called the SS Californian was stopped, stuck in a massive ice field. He tried to send a friendly warning to a nearby ship. That ship was the Titanic.
This was the infamous reply from the Titanic's operator, Jack Phillips. Now I know, it sounds unbelievably rude, but there was actually a technical reason for it. The Californian was so close that its powerful spark signal was like an explosion in Phillips's ears, completely jamming the very faint signals he was trying to pick up from the shore station at Cape Race. It was basically a cry for bandwidth management in a system that had none.
And this timeline just shows you the tragic result. The operator on the Californian, totally rebuffed, just ended his shift and switched off his radio at 11:30 p.m. Just 10 minutes later, the Titanic hits the iceberg. The closest ship, the one ship that could have saved everyone on board, was now deaf to the desperate distress calls that would soon fill the airwaves.
That disaster was a brutal, brutal test for wireless technology. And look, Marconi's invention absolutely saved over 700 lives by calling the rescue ship the Carpathia. But the official inquiry revealed all the system's deadly flaws. So, new international laws were passed almost immediately. They required 24-hour radio watches on big passenger ships, and most importantly, they outlawed Marconi's non-intercommunication policy for good. Public safety finally trumped private monopoly. In the final decades of his life, Marconi's story takes a much darker and more complex turn. You see, even as his technical vision was accelerating into the future, his politics became deeply, deeply entangled with one of the 20th century's most destructive ideologies.
In 1923, Marconi became an enthusiastic member of Benito Mussolini's fascist party. He genuinely saw it as a way to modernize Italy, and of course Mussolini used Marconi's incredible global fame as a propaganda tool, making him a senior figure in the regime.
And his involvement was not just passive. As president of Italy's Royal Academy, he was the one who personally enforced the regime's anti-Semitic policies. Research has even uncovered his own handwritten notes, where he marked a capital E for Ebreo, the Italian word for Jew, right next to the names of Jewish scientists, to make sure they were blocked from being admitted.
And this creates this just stark paradox, because while his politics were looking backwards, his science just kept leaping forward. This chart shows his incredible journey, from that noisy, messy spark gap to pioneering shortwave radio, and finally to experimenting with microwaves in the 1930s, the very same slice of the spectrum that our 4G and 5G phones use today. Incredible.
So in the end, we're left with this profound contradiction, aren't we? The man whose core invention was all about breaking down physical barriers to connect all of humanity spent his later years supporting a regime that was dedicated to building ideological and racial walls. He gave us the tools for a global village, but he embraced a philosophy of total exclusion. It's a legacy of both connection and division, and honestly, it's one we're still grappling with today.